as I promised when we released Fight Game Podcast Extra as a brand new show, I was going to do more boxing and MMA and more combat sports and not just professional wrestling, because the Fight Game Media Network is built off of the backs of the three sports. So I'm bringing in Carlos Toro to talk about some big fights coming up in boxing. And I'm sure as these fights come a little bit closer, we'll have more discourse on them. But Carlos, what's going on, man?
Hey, good to be back. And, I really was not expecting so many big fights to be coming up so soon. It still feels to me like it's May. We're already in July. We're like 3 weeks away from having a week of two of the biggest fights and two of the best fights on paper of the year. It's the next few months is going to be such an amazing time to be a boxing fan. 2023 has been treating us real good, but man, the next couple of months are going to be outstanding.
Yeah, it is really going to start heating up here in 3 weeks. And we're going to go through. I just was doing some Google searching, for a calendar of some of the major fights. And the first thing that popped up was ESPN's website. I guess they have a one page that kind of has a schedule. And they updated it with the most recent information that we have as far as big fights coming up. So I'm just going to use it. We don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Let's just use what ESPN they still cover boxing, maybe not to the extent that some people would like, but they still cover it. So let's use their list of key dates for fights. And let's start with one of the two fights that you were talking about, Fulton and Inoue, for Fulton's WBC and WBO junior featherweight title, July 25th in Tokyo, ESPN Plus. So it's not even a pay-per-view. This is one that you'll be able to see with your ESPN Plus subscription. And I think the last time we talked, you were telling me how on paper this might be the best one, or one of the two or three best ones of the rest of the year.
Yeah, Fulton versus Inoue is a fight that a year ago no one would have imagined happening because of the potential politic issues that could have presented itself. But credit to Fulton for being the champion and deciding to go all the way to Japan to fight Inoue. On paper, I think this is the best fight of the year. I know we have the next fight that a lot of people would beg to differ right down below it 4 days later, but Fulton is the guy that I think, in my opinion, is the top guy at 122 pounds and has been an absolute dynamite of a fighter, taking basically the best of that entire division that has to offer sans, Murodjon Akhmadaliev when he held the titles, the other title, the WBA and IBF titles. And Inoue has, it's already, in my opinion, cemented his legacy as the greatest Japanese boxer of all time. And he's quickly making a case for being one of the greatest lower weight fighters boxing has ever seen. And for Inoue to go for now, I believe this is his fifth weight class is going to try and win a world title in, coming off an undisputed run at bantamweight, to be able to have these two guys who produce like absolute fires. We're gonna attack each other. The fight's gonna take place in a phone booth once July 25th comes, because these guys, to a certain extent, to their detriment, they love engaging in these big firefights and kind of throw caution to the wind, especially Fulton, who, back in the OG days of the Pound for Pound podcast, Robert Sala, remember, would just say how much he just doesn't like how Fulton just basically throws himself into the wolves and lets himself get hit just to be able to throw some big punches. But that's what causes such great fights whenever Stephen Fulton comes to the ring, because
that was whenever I hear someone say that, I always think back to when Evander Holyfield turned heavyweight. Mm-hmm. And one of his strategies was, he was willing to take a punch because that's what it took for him to counter and get inside and land some combinations. He would sit there and take that punch and then just so he could return punches, and which is, maybe not the best strategy from a health perspective, or maybe when you're a little older and your reflexes aren't there. Instead, you maybe should bait the shot in, but like you said, if you have a strong chin and you are willing to take a shot because you know that the ones you're able to send back are going to be better shots, it can be a pretty good strategy, especially if the guy on the other side, if you think you're the stronger fighter.
But the problem here is that Inoue, even though he has not been tested a whole lot throughout his entire career, his toughness cannot be questioned. If you remember the first fight he had against Nonito Donaire a few years ago in Japan, Inoue was fighting parts of that fight essentially with one eye. He had a broken orbital bone during that fight, and he still went and dominated and nearly stopped in a couple of times, actually. To do that with essentially one eye, I mean, that shows a level of toughness that even Fulton has not entirely dealt with. And I think that's what kind of makes it so compelling, is the fact that Fulton can deliver these devastating shots, but Inoue is a guy who is capable of powering through those types of punches and basically from big injuries. And I'm just so excited for this fight, because I think whoever wins this fight makes a very, very strong case to be number one pound for pound, especially Inoue if he wins this fight.
Are you leaning a specific way yet?
I've told myself a long time ago, never bet against Inoue. Like, don't even bet for it to be for any fighter against Inoue to be a competitive one. But I think this will be the first time we'll see a truly competitive fight with Inoue. But I'm still gonna lean towards Inoue with I'm gonna say a close decision victory. I think both guys are gonna get hurt bad at different stages of the fight.
Do you know? Because I know this was scheduled for, what was it, a couple months ago, right? It was supposed to take place in May, and then they postponed it because Inoue had an injury. What was the injury? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I don't remember if it was a hand injury. I think it was something above the waist, if I remember correctly. But if I remember, but as I understood it, it wasn't like a major injury, but they kind of postponed it more as a precautionary because of all the logistics of getting Fulton to fight, having to travel to Japan, and the idea, and if you kind of wait and see how things progress, and then if it turns out, well, might need to wait a few weeks, then might as well just kind of postpone it for a couple of months and really make sure that Inoue is healthy.
All right, so the next one is kind of the big one, at least stateside, as far as excitement when it comes, for that you were talking pound for pound. Now these guys, at this point, probably aren't in the tippy top of the pound for pound, but previously in their careers, they're have close. Been, which is Errol Spence and Terrence Crawford. And I guess my first question is, do you think that this fight still has the same excitement as it would have had maybe 2 or 3 years ago?
I think so, yes. I think, one thing that people will say, well, they waited too long or anything. I mean, well, at the end of the day, both of these guys are undefeated. Both of these guys are holding all of their titles, and none of them have looked bad to the point where the fight itself has lost any luster. I mean, how long have we waited for Mayweather and Pacquiao? And a lot of people coming into that fight were kind of thinking, well, maybe they waited a little bit too long, maybe lost some of its luster, and then it turns out that more than 4 million pay-per-view fight.
Yeah, I mean, the money is right now for them. Finally, from the promotion aspect, the money is obviously right for them, and I think I don't think it's obviously not going to be the same kind of business that Pacquiao and Mayweather did, because that was just kind of like a once in a lifetime thing. But I do think there is something to making people wait for it, because you get to the point of where when you finally get it, there's just been so much buildup. Now, the thing that I wonder, and what this fight is not going to have, at least as far as I know, it's going to be a Showtime pay-per-view. but the Mayweather Pacquiao did have a vehicle behind it to help in the promotion. I don't know what they're doing for this one to kind of whet the appetite and remind people, but we are about 3.5 weeks away here from the fight happening, and I haven't really seen. Do you know if there's any preview material? Is Showtime doing their their weekly series of preview stuff like they usually do for the big fights?
I'm not 100% sure, but given how close we are, I mean, there got to be something. I know this week. I mean, this weekend we have a Showtime card with Drawn Ennis and Royman Villa, so it's possible they may announce something to the extent of maybe we'll get some coverage going on in the coming days and weeks. I know that actually today, or at least the day that we're recording this, I know they had a big round table with a bunch of ex-fighters or former opponents of both of these guys. I don't know if they're gonna release that to the public. I know there was at least a roundtable on that. I know for a fact that they definitely have posted content on the Showtime YouTube channel. I'm just not entirely sure if it's the full slate of the traditional Showtime boxing content that we're used to, but it's possible they may have something in the works and they'll just announce it on Saturday.
So it looks like, unless I'm reading this wrong, it looks like All Access Episode 1 is streaming on Saturday.
Okay.
So that's good because All Access is usually good stuff, though Showtime has taken a hit recently. They're not really I guess, what would you call it? A streaming network by themselves anymore. You have to buy it through Paramount Plus, which I have, so I'll be able to see that stuff. So I'm really excited for that. I was talking to a buddy who lives in Reno, and he really, really wanted to go to this fight. And he looked into tickets and he said, not going to be able to do it. So we're talking prices. We're talking giant gate here, I'm sure.
Yeah,
so that's the expectation for this thing. I think is still a pretty big deal, at least for the live gate. Now, for pay-per-view, that's a different story, and I'm really interested to see what this fight does from a pay-per-view perspective, because what we're going to have is we're going to really have a good experiment on what a fantastic boxing big time showdown is going to mean pay-per-view wise, and whatever the 2023 version of the freak fight is going to be, which is Jake Paul and Nate Diaz, because that comes the next week. My hope in my heart of hearts, people come out for Spence and Crawford, but there's going to be a piece of the MMA crowd who may not buy Spence and Crawford and then may buy Jake Paul and Nate Diaz. So I'm very intrigued into which of those shows does better business.
I think ultimately, it's going to be Spence Crawford, partially, in fact, because the Zone pay-per-view has not been able to produce the pay-per-view sales numbers that traditional pay-per-view has been able to do. Showtime, back in the old HBO days, when they did pay-per-view for giant fights, I mean, their numbers eclipse what the Zone is doing right now. And to an extent, Jake Paul, that lost to Tommy Fury, that I think I can see where some people are going to lose a little bit of luster and interest in that fight. But as far as Spence versus Crawford, this is kind of a similar situation to Canelo versus Golovkin 1, in the sense of you have Terrence Crawford, who is an absolute dynamite of a fighter who's proven to be a massive TV draw. But when he was traditionally shown to be the A side in pay-per-views, business didn't do so well. Golovkin versus David Lemieux did a fantastic gate at Madison Square Garden, didn't do so well on pay-per-view. Terrence Crawford versus Victor Postal, when he had his pay-per-view debut, didn't do that well on pay-per-view either. But when
so much so that Aram is just like, I can't sell this guy on pay-per-view. Like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, and now you have a similar situation where you pit that guy against the other guy that everyone wants to see. And this is like the big fight that everybody is going to tune in. The first fight between Canelo and Golovkin did, I want to say 1.1, 1.2 million. I don't think that should be considered the baseline for Spence Crawford. But I think getting close to that number, I think that should be, I think that could be expected. And I would think that Showtime probably feels a little more optimistic with the potential this fight has, given how ginormously successful Tank David versus Ryan Garcia was.
What was the final number on that fight? Do you remember?
I saw a couple of different numbers and I couldn't quite get a true confirmation. If it did not do 1 million, it got really, really close. I know I saw some numbers that said it did just a little above 1 million, but I couldn't quite be sure 100% of that. But let's put a nice wide range, 800 to 1.1 million, which is still, even if it didn't even get to that point, I still consider that to be a ginormous success.
Yeah, I mean, I think Showtime reported over 1 million, like 1.2 or something. So if we go by that, like, what a tremendous success.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can get close, to me, if you get to 750, 800, that is a success, because boxing pay-per-view is so splintered these days, and content is so splintered, and where you find this stuff is so splintered. You can watch some stuff on ESPN Plus, you can watch some stuff on Showtime, some stuff on DAZN, but there's not a lot of opportunity to really watch anything on like a linear cable channel. ESPN will do some stuff, but it's not like you can, turn on CBS and see boxing. I know Fox was doing some stuff, but I haven't seen a fight on Fox in quite a while. So with the audience being so splintered, I think, doing, 750, 800 would absolutely be a success for sure.
Yeah, and I think, to me, I think that should be, that's kind of where my projections lie, maybe around 800, 850,000. Although I typically go a little bit lower on the projection range of where pay-per-views go. But there's a good chance it might clear 800,000 just because of the excitement and how everybody has been wanting this fight for so long. And
there will definitely be some impulse buys come that weekend where they're just like, this is the thing that everyone's doing, I got to do it.
Oh yeah. And once fight week hits, I think that's when the excitement does reach a fever pitch. It's kind of similar to what Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder 1 did. The first fight, you wouldn't think that, like, oh well, it's gonna do okay, but there's a lot of unknowns as far as projecting the pay-per-view. And then once fight week hit, everyone immediately got excited for that one, and the first fight ended up being a much bigger success than I thought it was gonna be, which lend itself to having sequels that also did pretty well.
So do you have a certain way that you're leaning on this one? This is like, such a coin flip fight to me.
Yeah, I mean, I know some people will say that the inactivity and the stuff that Errol Spence has been dealing with,
the injuries, the injuries lean me maybe to Crawford, but
yeah, but I mean, Spence has proven that he can, that he doesn't really lose a lot of steps with the inactivity. I mean, he had a very sound performance against Danny Garcia, and it looked great. Terence Crawford, I mean, he's getting Terence Crawford. I'm still not sure, because Crawford has never faced a boxer that strong in Errol Spence before, and Spence is absolutely capable of using his power and his size to cause a lot problems with Crawford. This is, it's a coin flip. Right now, I think I might be leaning towards Spence just a tiny bit, but ask me in 2 weeks, I could very well be picking for Crawford. That's how close this is.
Yeah, no, I want to watch the shoulder content too. I want to watch the All Access, because like you said, a lot of the inactivity, you kind of forget what happened, 3-4 years ago. And I would like to revisit this story all over again, because these guys have been talking about having this fight for a while now. All right, we're going to skip over Jake Paul and Nate Diaz. Not because, it's more of a, like I said, the freak show kind of fight. I'm sure on In the Clinch, with Paul and Ryan. They'll probably talk a little bit about it because Nate Diaz is technically an MMA fighter, but also because I don't want to keep Carlos here too long. But let's quickly go to Navarrete and Valdez, August 12th for the junior lightweight title. This isn't one of the more well-known fights on the radar, but tell people why this is an intriguing one.
This one is a fascinating fight on paper because Navarrete has, for most of his career, he has looked almost unbeatable with the way he towers over his opponents and it's just sheer power. But then you look at his last fight, his last title defense, which, by the way, that was an early contender for fight of the year and probably still going to end up being one of the top 10 fights of 20. I know. I'm gonna actually look this up because I don't want to be wrong. Because my sense of timing has been so off for ever since COVID hit. But his fight against Liam Wilson was was in February. That was the first time that we truly saw weakness and a less than stellar Emmanuel Navarrete. And it's now getting to the point where now you're really wondering, is making 130 pounds getting a little too much? And that was part of the main problem with Navarrete when he was champion at 126 pounds, is that he was too big for that weight class, almost to his detriment. And now you go to 130, and it's now getting to that point where it's similar. Oscar Valdez it did bounce back very well with a win against Adam Lopez recently after Valdez just got absolutely dominated by Shakur Stevenson. So this is a fight where both of these guys, it's weird to say that they are at a crossroads because Valdez is only, he only suffered that one loss to a guy who will likely be a top pound for pound fighter within the next couple of years or even the next year or so. But both of these guys' stock, they're not exactly at their highest, but this is still a fight where you have a very intelligent fighter in Valdez who when given the right game plan can absolutely shut a fighter down. But how do you shut a fighter like Navarrete, who is, almost as tall as me, and I'm almost 6 foot tall and weighs so little, but carries so much power in his punches?
Mm-hmm.
I think this is going to be a low-key firefight between the two of them. But it is also going to be kind of an ugly fight, a lot of clinching, probably going to be a cut or two on both of these guys' faces. I wouldn't even be surprised if one or both of these guys get dropped because of just how I don't even what's the term, like bowling shoe ugly this fight can be. But I think that's part of the excitement. I think that's part of the intrigue with this fight.
Jim Ross loved that one. So let's move on to one of the two heavyweight fights that was recently announced. Anthony Joshua and Dillian White. This is 8 years after their first fight?
Yeah, 8 years.
In which Joshua won by knockout. And since then, White went on a crazy winning streak. He won 12 fights in a row. But he's also then, he's then gone up in competition, and in his last 4 fights, he lost to Povetkin, then he beat Povetkin, then he lost to Tyson Fury, got stopped, and then he won a majority decision over Jermaine Franklin. And Jermaine Franklin is also the person who Joshua last beat as well. So the same, similar opponent. Obviously, everyone knows Joshua's recent frustration in the 2 losses to Usyk, and before that, the knockout loss to Andy Ruiz Jr. 8 years later, these guys, lace them up again. And I feel, I don't know how realistic it is, but I sort of feel like Dillian White has a much better chance to win the fight 8 years later than maybe he did in 2015.
Which is funny, considering that you can argue that Dillian White might be at his worst in the last year and a half or so, because he didn't even look that good against Jermaine Franklin and was able to squeak out a majority decision. But you're right. I think that there is a much better chance, because this is still an Anthony Joshua that fights so reclusive, so one-dimensional, to the point where he almost fights afraid. Like, he's afraid of getting knocked down and getting rocked again, like what happened when he fought Vladimir Klitschko, like in the first fight against Andy Ruiz. And then Usyk was able to soundly outbox him and even hurt him a couple of times. Joshua needs to find a way to get back to the pre Klitschko Joshua, where he had no fear. He showcased his physical talents and had an excellent boxing acumen to complement the power and Adonis-like physique that he has. But this version of Joshua just doesn't seem to have that killer instinct anymore. Even in the fight against Jermaine Franklin, Franklin was the perfect kind of opponent to, he's a good quality boxer who can go rounds, but Joshua just, he almost was like at sparring speed, not because he wasn't taking the fight seriously, but because he just doesn't feel ready to let his hands go like he did in the past. And I think that's where Dillian Whyte can try and take advantage, because for as much as I say that Dillian Whyte sometimes has not looked great in his last few fights, he's still a guy who's willing to let his hands go and throw caution to the wind and risk it all. I mean, even the fight against, in the Tyson Fury fight, dominate him, but there were moments where Whyte was getting really ready to really turn it into a slugfest. But Joshua, I just don't see the same from Joshua. I still pick Joshua to win this one with quite frankly, a boring decision win, because I don't think Dillian Whyte has what he had a few years ago to be able to beat Joshua. If 2020 Dillian Whyte was fighting 2023 Joshua, I would pick 2020 Dillian Whyte to beat this version of Joshua. But 2023 Dillian Whyte, not as hot as he was a few years ago. But I think that there's still. But I think you're right. I think Whyte right now has a better chance of beating Joshua now than the first fight 8 years ago.
All right, Arthur Beterbiev against Callum Smith for 3 light heavyweight titles, August 19th in Canada, Quebec City. That is also ESPN and an ESPN Plus fight, much like the Navarrete and Valdez fight. So it looks like it's going to be streamed across both the channel and the platform. What's your thoughts on this one?
Artur Beterbiev is still arguably the most dangerous fighter in all per pound, just because of that perfect knockout record. And he's just an absolutely killer in the ring who will just, he's willing to knock guys out 10 seconds into a fight. And he's defended his titles with like first and second round knockouts in the past. So that's how dangerous Artur Beterbiev is. Callum Smith presents maybe the most interesting challenge to Artur Beterbiev. Callum Smith has looked really good since the loss to Canelo Alvarez. And I thought that the loss to Canelo and the way Callum Smith lost that fight, I thought that was going to decimate him to the point that, we're never going to see him in this position again. But credit to him, his rejuvenation, even though it's only been 2 Canelo loss, he's looked terrific at 175 pounds, coming off, 2 very dominant performances against Lennon Castillo and Matteo Barderlik. And Callum Smith just seems to kind of found the version of himself that won the World Boxing Super Series, where he was just an absolute, dynamite of a puncher who knew how to use the ring and use his long frame to, extend his punches to the point where he's able to connect with full power on almost every punch. And he's been able to do that in the last couple of fights. The question I still have is whether Callum Smith can take a punch as hard as Artur Beterbiev, because Canelo didn't really test Callum Smith in to the point Archer is going to. Canelo's strategy was take out Callum Smith's arms by just punching them repeatedly to the point where Callum Smith can't even throw anything. So this will be a different test for Callum, but I think this will also be a different test for Artur Beterbiev, where he hasn't really fought a fighter with this combination of length and size and momentum and power. And Callum Smith has not fought a fighter as dangerous and heavy-handed as Artur Beterbiev.
All right, moving right along here. Let's finish up with these last two fights. We have Usyk and Daniel Dubois for Usyk's 3 titles. Now, this fight, I was kind of looking up. I was like, man, like I feel like he hasn't even had that many fights, and it's a little. It would seem a little early for a title shot, but he is. What is he? 19-1. He lost to Joe Joyce a couple of years ago, and that made me go look and go, well, how come Joe Joyce doesn't get this shot? Well, Joe Joyce just lost his last fight, so that is probably one of the reasons.
Which was said, by the way, if for those of you who not saw that fight, Joe Joyce versus Chile Zhang, boy, that was a weird but hell of a fight. I actually recommend, for those of you who have the Zone. Actually, no, I don't think this was on the Zone. I don't remember where it was on, but I think it may be on the Zone. But if you have a chance to go out and start Joe Joyce versus Zhilei Zhang, that was quite the experience, and they're actually gonna run it back.
So my question to you, because the fight that rings in the back of my head when I see a pretty dominant champion versus kind of an up and comer in a title fight, and Robert Silva probably has recollection of where he was on this day when this fight happened, is Lennox Lewis and Michael Grant. And as we're watching this fight, Michael Grant was kind of the young and up and coming knockout heavyweight, and Lennox Lewis was such a level above him that it actually ruined Michael Grant's career. Now, I don't know if Michael Grant would have ever achieved if there wasn't a top heavyweight like Lennox Lewis. Like maybe Lennox Lewis is just above and beyond, or maybe Michael Grant just didn't have the goods. But it really kind of sent him in a spiral. Like he lost his next fight by first round knockout. Then he won a bunch of fights, and then he kind of traded off fights as his career got much older. But like I just kind of worry about a young fighter taking a fight where it may be a little too early, and you have a champion like Usyk. Now, I think the good thing here is Usyk is not a crazy knockout artist. He is much more of a technician and a strong fighter, but not someone who you got to worry about, this first round knockout where the guy gets knocked crazy. Like that's just not his style. And so maybe it's okay, because the deflation, if Dubois gets steamrolled, is that, oh shoot, now where you are on this pecking order, and because if it's not Usyk, then it's Fury, and Fury's the one who may put you into the second row, and then below them is Joshua, and then Wilder. So it's just interesting because there's 4 fighters who are kind of slightly above the rest of them in the heavyweights, and so I kind of wonder, like, does this kid have a chance? Like, is this going to be a steamrolling? And also why is this the fight right now?
So to answer the first question, does Dubois have a shot? It's between slim and none. Because if you look back to the Joe Joyce fight, Joe Joyce was able to dominate Dubois exclusively with the jab. I mean, if you go back and watch that fight, all Joe Joyce did was just throw the jab at Dubois, I think it was his left eye, or I don't remember if it was left eye or right, but either one of his eyes. And all he did was just do that for like 7-8 rounds, and Dubois' orbital bone, I think it was, just kind of got was broken because all he did was just jab at it. And Usyk presents a similar type of situation where you have an astounding technical fighter, except Usyk is a faster puncher than Joe Joyce, and he's a much better fundamentally sound fighter than Joe Joyce. And Dubois, for as much as he's been able to get on this win streak, the quality of opposition has been very subpar. Bogdan Dinu, Trevor Bryan, Kevin Lorena with his last win was the best win on record, and Kevin Lorena was effectively very little experience at heavyweight because he's just been the redheaded stepchild of the cruiserweight title holders for most of the 2010s, and he has not shown that he can fight against a boxer. He still has not proven that, and Dubois is still to a certain extent, very raw talent because he doesn't have a lot of amateur experience, but he has this dynamic physique and dynamic power that has been able to give him a lot of opportunities to win fights. As for why this fight is happening, the short answer, because the long answer requires going all the way back over a decade to Fres Oquendo, because of the WBA's multiple world title situation. I'm not joking. This is a fight that has been more than 10 years in the making. Not necessarily because of Usyk and Dubois, but because the WBA doesn't know what it's doing half the time. But basically, WBA has for a long time had the world champion. Sometimes they had a secondary world champion they called the regular champion, and in that case, the actual world champion is called the super champion, and then there's the interim champion. Well, Trevor Bryan was I believe the interim champion, and then he had multiple fights scheduled, but with the actual regular champion, it was a humongous mess involving Don King and all sides involved. And then Trevor Bryan was, I think, either he already had the regular title or was promoted to regular champion, and then Dubois kind of swooped in at a Don King card in Florida, probably seen by maybe 1,000 people, and Dubois just absolutely destroyed Trevor Bryan because Trevor Bryan is not a top 10, top 20, top 50. Yeah, you can find hard to believe that maybe he's in the top 100 heavyweight.
50, jeez.
I mean, I've seen Trevor Bryan fight numerous times. I mean, let me put it this way: he almost lost his title when I covered the Don King card in Ohio for you guys.
Yeah.
He almost lost to a last-minute replacement who was a crawfish farmer in Louisiana or something like that. He almost lost that fight. And
wow.
So that's why we have this fight here, because the WBA shenanigans over the last decade with that heavyweight title is finally going to come to fruition and finally going to have one single WBA champion until like 2025 when the WBA decides back to regular titles.
All right. So the last one we're going to talk about is Canelo Alvarez. And really, today, Canelo is like the prom queen, and everybody is trying to throw their hat in the ring to date the prom queen. Jermell Charlo is the fight, and that's going to be September 30th, Showtime pay-per-view. Who else was in the running for this fight?
Well, I know there were a lot of people and a lot of reports coming in that everyone thought that Canelo was actually going to fight Jermell's brother Jamal,
right?
In that fight, and Jamal, not to get too deep, but Jamal's been dealing with a lot of outside the ring stuff that's prevented him from fighting the last 2 years.
Yeah, he hasn't fought in 2 years. I was about to say.
And right now, I believe part of the reason Jamal's not fighting Canelo is because what he's dealing with and the time frame of it all, it's still not enough for Jamal to sort of get back in the ring and prepare for this fight. And I mean, as far as what other fights are out there, I mean, you got to look at the PBC super middleweight roster. You got David Benavidez, and you have David Morrell Jr., who the top two super middleweights that PBC has, and those would make fantastic fights. And those still could happen because Canelo supposedly signed a 3-fight agreement with PBC, so those fights could still happen down the road. Which, if Canelo wasn't fighting either of them, then I suppose that the only other option would have been Jermell. Even though it did feel out of left field, because this is a guy who's been at 154 pounds, seemingly getting ready to fight Tim Tszyu, and then all of a sudden, boom, Jermell Charlo comes in and gets Canelo Alvarez, which, as far as the fight on paper, I know people will say, well, look at, I mean, Jermell is a 154 pounder, Canelo is a 168 pounder, who's fought as high as 175. Like, this is a mismatch. Physically, no, because if you look at Jermell, his size, I mean, I think Jermell's actually technically a bigger person than Canelo Alvarez. And the one thing about Jermell and his brother Jamal, that from a physical standpoint, we've been saying for many years, is that how the hell are these guys making weight and making it look easy? Like, Jermell and Jamal, I'm not kidding when I say they could easily have been fighting on 168 by this point already, but they've been able to keep going at it 154 and 160. So I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue as far as the physical supposed mismatch, because I think this fight is going to be, I think it's, you can throw the weight discrepancy aside, because I think that this will still be a really, really good fight, and I wouldn't discredit Jermell's chances of winning.
And the storyline is that Jermall, like you said, he has been inactive, and it sounds like there's some mental things going on with him. Obviously, very smart to deal with those things, because I would imagine the temptation to take this Canelo fight had to be giant. So these issues have to be really, really important for him to say no thanks for this one. But if his brother fights and it's a valiant effort and Canelo wins and Jermall feels fine and he feels healthy, that is a natural storyline for the twin brother to come and try and avenge the loss. And, you know, you can do some nice stuff television wise. And since this is on Showtime, I'm sure we're going to get more all access stuff. So I hope that, you know, they have some ideas on how to tell those stories. But obviously we want Jermall to be healthy and to be, you know, not have to fight and still have these issues. How much longer do you think Canelo is going to be the big dog?
I think at this point, until someone beats him for those super middleweight titles, because that's essentially what's left. The only thing that Canelo still has left. I think he lost a lot of stock with the loss to Dimitri Bivol. And the fact that it wasn't even a close fight, and that a lot of people would easily pick Bivol in a rematch, it's, you know, but the fact that Canelo still has all the belts at 168, and PBC still has the largest pool of good fighters that Canelo hasn't fought yet that could challenge Canelo for those fighters. So I think until, you know, Jermell or Jamal or Benavidez or Morrell beats him for those titles, I think you can still consider Canelo the quote unquote big dog. And you know, and we'll see within these next 3 fights if any of these guys beat Canelo Alvarez. I see a lot of people still believing Benavidez has the best chance, and David Morrell, with the way he's been progressing in a very short career, he also has, you know, a lot of people are saying that maybe he's got an increasingly better chance as time goes on to beat Canelo Alvarez. But I think right now, until he's no longer the undisputed champion, and that would be by way of someone taking those belts from him, I think he should be considered the quote unquote the big dog in boxing.
And it sounds like that Bivol fight is not happening, at least right away, is because Bivol didn't really gain a whole lot by beating Canelo. At least from the public eye, it wasn't a devastating knockout. Obviously, he's not an American fighter. Not that that always means something in 2023. But, you know, it doesn't sound like beating Canelo was going to take Bivol from, you know, sort of hardcore boxing fan who knows who he is and how good he is to something a little bit more that the public, the casual fan can enjoy. And so then there's risk for Canelo in taking that fight and losing again, because he's not losing to a killer. If he loses, he's losing to somebody who is still kind of on the outskirts from the overall casual fan community.
And I think a lot of people weren't really paying a whole lot of attention to that fight because it was on the zone.
Yeah.
And you already shrink the pool significantly by putting it on the zone pay-per-view. Whereas, these last couple of fights of Canelo on the zone pay-per-view, I mean, when was the last time you could say Canelo fights have felt this unimportant since, I guess, would you say maybe since before Mayweather?
Well, so here's the thing. What, like, when you fight the John Ryders of the world,
right?
Even the third Golovkin fight, I think most people saw that fight and they were like, "Oh, Golovkin's just over the hill. That's why this fight happened."
Yeah.
So that kind of left a bad taste. Him losing to Bivol. He fought some good fighters, in Plant and Saunders. He was just a level above them. You already mentioned Callum Smith. The knockout of Kovalev was exciting, but at the same time, we saw what Ward did to Kovalev. So Kovalev was a
like,
shadow of himself.
And like less than 2 months before Kovalev fought Canelo, Kovalev almost got knocked out in Russia on a title defense. So he was already a little bit softened up heading into that Canelo fight.
Yeah, I mean, circling that 2013 Mayweather fight, that is interesting because it's sort of similar to, when I was saying how the guy is on the come up and then he fights one of the best fighters. And in Canelo's example, he actually used that Floyd fight as a way to go, okay, this is where I have to get to, because really what he's doing is he's running back the Floyd playbook,
right?
As being the A side, which has been actually, pretty impressive to see. He's able to do that and then some. So like I said, in a very sort of different universe than Floyd was fighting in, with how segregated all of the media is these days. But yeah, he did have some pretty bad fights, within his latest run. There were guys like, remember Rocky Felding. That was pretty poor.
But at the very least, those fights weren't on pay-per-view, unlike the Golovkin and the Bivol one.
Right.
So I mean, the zone, at the very least, with the Rocky Fielding fight, yeah, I mean, that was, in retrospect, arguably maybe the biggest mismatch involving a Canelo fight we have seen in maybe like ever, at least like past this like teenage Mexico fighting days.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was intrigue.
Cesar Chavez, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but at least Canelo, at least that fight, sir, we remember it more because that essentially served as a squash match disguised as a fight announcement with the first Golovkin fight. And with the Rocky Fielding fight, I mean, there was the intrigue of what's this app that's paying Canelo $300 million to be in, but now you're on the zone pay-per-view. It's like, people don't know, a lot of people don't have the zone, and now you're expecting them to download, get a subscription, and then pay for something that they're probably not going to tune in again. I mean, that's kind of where I'm on when I say like it's felt like this unimportant to, I guess, the masses, where like you're not getting the same casual audience that you normally would get for a Canelo fight.
All right, I've kept you well past the time that I asked you to be available for, but the thing about it is whenever I talk to you, I just go, you know what? Carlos still got it. Like, he's still so dialed in, because you're not writing 30 posts a day like you were previously, right? Like that's when you were so dialed into every nook and cranny of boxing, when you were doing the stuff for Fightful and you were doing your newsletter. But now I think you've been able to kind of pull back, and you're seeing more big picture stuff and not as much of the kind of the microscope look at it. And that's why I like you coming on, because you still have such a great knowledge of the day to day. And you know what we're gonna do next time?
What?
I think we're gonna have to get you and Robert back on.
Oh,
we'll bring both of you back on, a little reunion show for the next time we talk boxing, whenever that is. We'll figure out a time and day, and we'll do something with the three of us. I think will be a lot of fun.
Oh, I'm in. All
right, Carlos. I know you're trying to create your Twitch community there. You want to give people your username and such, and how to find you on Twitch?
Well, for those of you who are into video games and me making a little bit of video game history, you can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Toro Night. That's TORONITE. And that's where I'm going to be doing really mostly video game stuff. It's for those of you who remember Pokemon, I basically play that and try to beat it within the scope of like world record times, the trading card games that they had on the old Game Boy Color. So I do that. Actually, just yesterday at the time of recording, I actually just moved up like 9 spots on the world ranking. So I'm in like, I think 40. I once it gets verified, but I believe I would be 43rd in the world.
Wow.
And then I might have some stuff in the works with doing some stuff, maybe a potential solo project on as far as boxing on the YouTube side. So that could still happen. But if I ever do anything like that, I'll probably announce it on Twitter, and you can follow me on Twitter at Carlos Toro Media.
All right, not a Threads user yet. You're not.
Well, here's the thing. I probably am going to actually make a Threads account today or tomorrow, but I don't have it, so I can't plug it yet.
Okay. Well, we'll check you back next time, and you can talk about it. We'll see if Threads is. Supposedly they got like 30 million users already. A lot of these are just Instagram.
I didn't even know it was a thing until today.
Yeah, Instagram accounts. If you have an Instagram account, you kind of get a free Thread account, so you just you use the same username and such. So it was smart the way that they rolled it out, because they automatically just had so many people sign up. But yeah, we'll see if it's a thing. And because Twitter, I think if people have been on Twitter, and I've been on Twitter since probably 2008, I'm guessing it is definitely gone downhill in the last several years. So all right, check out Carlos. Thanks again, Carlos, for doing this. And you can find Carlos and help him he's trying to get his subscriptions on Twitch high, so that he can become a partner with Amazon and such. So go follow him there on Twitch. All right, Carlos, thanks again.
All right, sounds good.